I am thrilled to be part of this tribute for Dr. Jack Behrman. He taught me international study my first semester of my second year at UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School. I remember that being one of my most challenging courses in my MBA program, and that Dr. Behrman really pushed us to learn all we could about the world as far as it related to business and the impact of the global economy on business. I guess my favorite memory of him would be just the fact that he was constantly challenging us and helping us and striving for us to be the best we could be. While I didn't know Dr. Behrman that close, I do recall him as one of the very many caring faculty members at UNC Kenan-Flagler, and I'm thrilled to be part of this tribute to him. He was a fantastic person, a fantastic professor, and an exceptional human being.
Hello, my name is Bill Judge, and I'd like to recount the time that I first met Jack Behrman. I was a newly minted MBA, actually not minted. I just started an MBA program at UNC Chapel Hill in 1983. Jack was a guest lecturer in my management seminar. During the seminar, he gave some very provocative, stimulating, thought-provoking ideas about the purpose of business. And at the conclusion of his talk, he invited anyone who was interested in these ideas to come and speak with him. Well, I took him up on that. Later that week, I met with him in his office. In fact, that began a long and fruitful and very wonderful relationship with Jack. In fact, I spent 6 beautiful years in Chapel Hill, 2 years in my MBA program and 4 years in my PhD program. And Jack was a mentor and a friend during that time. He helped me both personally and professionally, and I found him to be wise and generous with his time. I really miss him, and I appreciate the opportunity to offer this tribute. The world has lost a dear soul. Thanks for coordinating this.
Bill Judge, who's given a tribute as well. I have two thoughts for you about Jack Behrman. Remember, in the first year of MBA school, about halfway through the semester, we were a tribe, blasted by testing and blasted by new ideas and battle hardened. And so when this gentleman shows up to address the class without any introduction, we didn't know who he was. And so to break the awkward moment, I raised my hand and politely asked, "Sir, who are you?" He was a bit taken aback and perhaps slightly miffed that Professor Tillman hadn't provided an introduction for his session. But he gave us a long list of his positions there in Chapel Hill. But we didn't know much about what all that meant. But the hour that he spent with us after that was very important, because he talked about new ideas, new ways of looking at the world and thinking about business and why we were in Chapel Hill. What are we doing? And here was a guy who was going to be refreshing. Here was a guy who was going to take us on a new intellectual journey. And so, thank you for that, Professor Behrman. Secondly, I too, like Bill, took Professor Behrman up on his invitation for office hours. And our conversation took a very important and interesting turn. We talked about love. And he said to me, "Mike, what does love mean to you?" And I was influenced by M. Scott Peck at the time. And I gave him my definition. And he said, "You know, Mike, that's not a bad definition. That's a very useful, I think." And to me, this is Jack Behrman, the professor. He's taking us on roads that he's traveled, pathways that he's traveled many times. But for us, it's a new pathway. And he allows us to bump along at our own pace, perhaps giving us a little steer now and then, asking a survey question, and allowing us to then take the road less traveled by in our own lives, our own intellectual lives and professional lives. And Professor Behrman, for that I thank you. Lynn and Lay, thank you for putting this together. And for the other respondents, thank you for your memories of Professor Behrman. Again, Michael Markels from Bangkok signing off. All the best.
It's hard to think about a world without Jack. He was quite the influence. I remember the first day of our first year in class. He walks in, barely saying a word, and proceeds to announce that he's there to teach us to all become very good fascists. Needless to say, that took us all a bit back, and then he spent the next hour explaining as to how that's exactly what we were going to be doing. We wanted things on time, we wanted the trains to work, we wanted the laws to be there, and we wanted our competition to all go away so we didn't have to worry about pricing and all the other irritants that competition brings to a business. There's several things about Jack, though, that ultimately are most important. He taught us the need for critical, objective thinking, but most particularly driven by values, driven by the things that really matter, principles and ethics, and how doing it otherwise is short-sighted and really ultimately counterproductive. We also had the uncanny sense that if you tried to BS him, that lightning could come out of his eyes. He was one of the more demanding of the professors, and I think most of us all agree, and most of the tributes affirm, he had the ability to bring out the best of us, to challenge and to demand that we do our best. And that is something that always served me in extremely good stead. And lastly, the international business course. I didn't think much about it other than the fact that I really enjoyed it. But ultimately, at age 55, when I ended up running the USO, Worldwide Operations, many of those lessons learned under Jack's tutelage proved to be invaluable. And my ability to work with many different cultures and many different foreign leaders, and it provided us with a competitive advantage that I'm sure would not have been there had it not been for Jack. I'll miss knowing that he's there. He's always going to be a conscience, and I'll always thank him. Blessings, Jack. You're a tribute to the profession.
As a former student of Dr. Behrman, he is one of the most memorable and one of the finest professors I ever had. I can remember him perched on the desk in front of the MBA class, firing questions at us and knocking our answers right back at him. He was great, and he was impressive to some. I noticed one MBA JD challenging him on something, and he was holding on to the front of the desk with both hands to keep them from shaking. Dr. Behrman was just great. He had us read things that are memorable and things that everyone should know, whether or not they're in an MBA program. I was privileged to get to have a dinner with him after I graduated, and he told my husband and I this wonderful story about how he almost missed meeting his wife, because when he saw her at a dance, she was so pretty that he knew the devil's handiwork when he saw it. So it is with so much fondness that I remember him, and I'm so glad to have a chance to speak of him. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry East. I was in the Carolina MBA class of 1973. Dr. Jack Behrman was the finest professor that I've had, whether as an undergraduate at Indiana, at Carolina, or in subsequent executive education at Harvard and at Oxford University. Why? Jack didn't perceive himself as a classroom professor. He was, and he knew he was, a successful businessman, government leader who happened to be exquisitely knowledgeable in many areas and hence went into academics. Jack taught us how to think on three different planes: the tactical plane, the operational plane, and the strategic plane. He then taught us how to take those levels and build plans, and subsequently he taught us how to articulate our views crisply. Finally, he taught us how to be decisive and to take action. We had Dr. Behrman for two courses, comparative management and business ethics, and in both he was excellent. As an IBMer, I certainly used his comparative management knowledge and skills when I was a senior business area manager in IBM Europe, and then subsequently when I was an international marketing executive responsible for one of IBM's global financial services accounts. I think about Jack and some of his comments regularly, just as you do. That's good analysis, Mr. East. Now tell me about how you're going to cope with 65% of the iceberg below the waterline. Whew! Two incidents that I would share with you about Jack. After church one Sunday at University Presbyterian, our, at that time, probably 20-month-old son was antsy and ready to go home and have lunch and was grumpy. And Jack picked him up and put Chip on his shoulders and raced around the church lot with Chip yelling, "Run, horsey, run." Well, every Sunday after that, when we went to church, Chip hugged Jack's leg and just said horsey, and Jack knew what to do. The second incident occurred in the business ethics class on the Monday before the 1972 Nixon-McGovern presidential race, when Behrman, for 90 minutes, gave a sermon on why both candidates were ill-equipped to be president of the United States. There was no hemming, no hawing. It was a stream of consciousness for 90 minutes. At the end, Jack posed several questions. The first is, if you have a choice to vote for a crook or a fool, always vote for the crook. How do you impeach a fool? Thought that certainly carried into today's circumstance. Thanks, Jack.
Hi, friends and family of Jack Behrman. My name is Bill Glazer. I met Jack first at a very interesting time for both of us. We were selected as consultants for a USAID mission to Russia in the fall of 1993, while there was a great deal of economic and political turmoil over there. Jack and I were part of a two-member team in addition to other two-member teams, and our responsibility was to visit Yaroslavl, Rostov-on-Don, and Volgograd. In each case, we talked with the local town fathers and proto-mafia types and so on. It was very, very interesting, and we were there for 3 weeks, staying in more primitive hotels, etc. So it was a very close relationship that we developed. After that, I tended to lose sight of Jack, and then saw his name and called up, and we reestablished ourselves as email friends. I always respected his background in politics and academics, and we shared many thoughts over the years in regard to political and economic matters. He honored me greatly by sending me 3 or 4 of his published works. I'll never forget Jack. I was pleased to know a half a dozen people in my life who have made a difference in the world, and Jack was one of them. So here's to you, Jack.
I think that the best one-word description of Professor Jack Behrman is guru. From my perspective, he was not only an academician, a manager and former politician, but also a thinker, a visionary and a wise man. Over 25 years, we kept exchanging views about a wide range of issues, thanks to which I have substantially enriched my own worldview. More tangible effects of our cooperation in the framework of the MBA Enterprise Corps, for which I, as a Pole, am particularly indebted to Professor Behrman, are twofold. First, almost 200 Polish companies and other organizations across the whole country could import elements of Western business culture. Second, the program has intensified grassroots social contacts between Poles and Americans, and hence it has enriched mutual understanding between our two nations. Last but not least, I feel personally indebted to Professor Behrman for having had an opportunity to get to know around 200 Americans and Poles involved in the MBA Enterprise Corps. My relationships with quite a number of them I dare to qualify as true friendships. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Blackman. I met Jack Behrman in 1972 when I was in the second year of the MBA program at Keenan Flagler. Now, Jack taught the International Business course, which was a required course at that time. Everybody took. There are 2 things that I'll never forget from Jack's class, and in addition to his personal characteristics, and I would say that the most outstanding characteristics that Jack had were his ability to challenge us and get the best out of us, which he certainly accomplished. And secondly, he encouraged us to be ourselves and to be creative. Since I was a graduate of Vanderbilt, I think Jack either liked me or took pity on me, because he said, well, at least you can write a coherent paragraph, which was true. And but getting back to my story of the 2 memories, the first one would be Jack felt like that the MBA program had several inadequacies, which he could remedy in his class. He did this by assigning a management book a week. And my group of 7, study group, just broke these books up and to each member of the team, and we wrote an outline of each book. Now, when Jack heard about this, he said, well, this presents an interesting dilemma for your group. And I said, how's that? He said, well, the question is, now that you have the outlines, are you going to sell them to the rest of the class? Or, since the work is done, are you going to donate them? And we thought about it a while, and we decided we'd donate them. And that's what we did. The second thing that I remember that Jack did, and I'll never forget, back then, 45 years ago, the faculty had done away with the thesis requirement in the business school. And Jack said, well, that being the case, this is an MBA program, a professional business school. So he went out and found projects for each two-man team in the class to do, and you had a year to do it. Jim Wright and I drew the North Carolina Ports Authority and their trade with Latin America. We did a good job on this and enjoyed it, working on it. I guess I'll never forget Jack. He made the second year more enjoyable, I think. And the two professors that stand out in my mind are Jack and Dick Levin. And I hope you have enjoyed this video. Maybe it brings back some memories to you. Thank you.
My name is Chandley Offerman. I was a student in the MBA class of 1978. International business was a required course that year, thanks to the vision and insistence of Dr. Behrman. He had quite a reputation for having high expectations of his students. I found his lectures both exciting and challenging. I still have vivid memories of him making his points with energy and passion as he strode back and forth in front of the class, the braided leather strap of his keychain hanging from his pocket. He encouraged my interest in the international arena, and I took another course from him where he connected me as a student consultant for a special project with a textile company in Winston-Salem. Successfully completing that project gave me a lot of confidence, and I did indeed go on to have a 30-year career in international business. I attribute much of my success in that career to the encouragement, influence, and teaching of Dr. Behrman, and I will always remember him.
I joined the Keenan Institute in the fall of 1989, and shortly thereafter, Ross Perot showed up. The Berlin Wall came down, and almost the next day, some MBA students showed up in Behrman's office going, how do we get to Central and Eastern Europe to help turn those economies into market economies? And Jack Behrman went, okay, let's figure out a way to do that. Fast forward a little bit, and we're at the Keenan Institute, and the MBA Enterprise Corps has been launched. And what I learned and what is just so special for me about my time in working with Jack Behrman is how much I learned about international affairs, what I learned about USAID. He and I had wonderful conversations. He might not think so, but I thought they were. But he would write reports to USAID, and I would say, no, that sounds too negative. We need to make it more positive. And he was so tolerant of all the ways in which I tried to just contribute and make a contribution. But he is one of my most special memories of my early years of the Keenan Institute and at UNC Chapel Hill. And I am so grateful for that time when I got to work with him. And I just want his family to know that I'm one of the people out of thousands probably who have benefited so much from his kindness, his extraordinary knowledge, and his care and passion for the world.
My name is Svetlana Sikorska. I met Jack Behrman in 1991 when he was the director of the MBA program, and I was the Polish language teacher for the groups of volunteers who risked a long flight across the ocean all the way to Poland, to the center of Europe. They came to advise newly formed private enterprises after the political changes of 1989. Support and help from the USA came to Poland again. Polish people hadn't forgotten President Woodrow Wilson and Herbert Hoover and all the help Polish people and hundreds of thousands of Polish children received from the American Relief Administration after the First World War in the years 1919-1922, and again from the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration during the Second World War in the years 1939, 1941 and afterwards. This time it was Jack Behrman who came to help and trigger the exchange of knowledge, thought and experience. And for me personally, apart from being extremely intelligent, knowledgeable, well-mannered, diplomatic in his relations with others, Jack Behrman was also a soft-hearted, good-humored, ready to listen and help, fatherly person. I am very, very happy to have met him. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jack Casarda, Professor Emeritus at the Keenan Flagler Business School and still Director of the Center for Air Commerce. I knew Jack for almost 30 years. When Paul Rizzo was Dean at Keenan Flagler in 1989, he asked me if I would head up the Keenan Institute of Private Enterprise, but with a special request. Would I help internationalize the business school and the MBA programs? I told him I'd give it a try. I learned early on that to be successful, particularly in areas where you don't have a great deal of experience, it's always better to work with somebody who's smarter than you, more knowledgeable, and more experienced. Enter Jack Behrman. I didn't know Jack personally, but I did know his reputation. Stellar scholar, researcher, teacher in the international field, founder of the leading association of international business schools in its top journal, Deputy Secretary of Commerce for International under Lyndon Johnson. Just an incredible set of credentials. So I went over to Carroll Hall and met with Jack and asked if he would consider joining me in this initiative to help internationalize the Keenan Institute and, of course, Keenan Flagler. He agreed, and his first project, always a mega project for Jack, big impact project, was the MBA Enterprise Corps, which grew remarkably with the able assistance, dedicated assistance of Lynn Gerber, Lee Shamblin, and others. It's history now, how they grew from the 15 leading business schools that they coordinated and organized the MBAs and placed so many in Central and Eastern Europe, expanding to 30, 35, 40 or more business schools across the country. This brought a substantial amount of recognition and stature to Keenan Flagler and to the Institute, and it was the cornerstone of the Institute's financial success and substantive success during its first 10 years. There are many other ways that Jack contributed to the Institute, but I was told I only have 3 minutes, so let me say that it was a true privilege to have known and worked with such an incredible person, who I can characterize simply as brilliant, insightful, highly knowledgeable, extremely hardworking, and although a bit crusty at times, clearly warm at heart. Jack Behrman was and always will be my icon. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Bill Perrell. Jack Behrman and I were friends for over 40 years, and most of that time we were colleagues on the faculty at the business school. I came to the school with a large cohort of rookie professors, and most of us had no clue what we were doing. But Jack provided leadership and a role model. He had a vision of how we could have an impact within the school, and through that, have the school impact its students and society. He motivated me then, and over the years, I continued to turn to him for his sound advice. Often, he responded with more questions rather than with answers. But boy, could he ask good questions. And the questions he asked helped you figure out what you should do next. And when you started to do it, he was there to be supportive. I admired Jack for his servant leadership in the business school and in the Keenan Institute. What he did was not for his fame or glory, but rather for the impact of the place, including its impact on teaching. I tried to emulate his tenacity in pushing each student to think independently. He was a master at that. I respected his ethical code, which to him meant behaviors and not just words. I marveled at his energy and innovation on the scholarship side of things. I also learned a lot from him about being a dad. He and Louise raised children who have Jack's work ethic and standards and humility at the same time as world-class accomplishments. Jack was one of a kind, sometimes quirky, but certainly the most self-disciplined person I ever have known. Who else do you know who would stand on their head to do yoga for a half an hour in the early morning hours, or alternatively work to train aging eyes so that they didn't need eyeglasses to see? He also had intellectual discipline, which started with clearly thought out ideas. Even so, when he was in charge of a group, and he was often in charge of a group, he didn't push for his own views or let his ego get in the way, but rather brought everyone into a team effort where there was a consensus of ideas. But Jack wasn't shy when he needed to get attention to be able to exert that leadership. I smile when I think about how he launched into a presentation to a large auditorium of MBA students who were noisy and not paying much attention. With a shrill whistle, he went from flat-footed on the auditorium floor to standing on the stage, and then instantly started into his presentation. He brought that same athleticism to his leisure pursuits and things like golf and ping pong and skiing, where he was very competitive. I will always be thankful for the time that I had with Jack, for his friendship and guidance, for his contributions to UNC, and yes, for that occasional kick in the butt.
Hello everyone, my name is Nick Dido, and I had the pleasure of meeting Jack Behrman 45 years ago as a second-year MBA student here at the business school at UNC. I entered the MBA program in 1971, and one of the first things I heard from day one was the saying that one should save an L for Behrman. That was commonly understood among the MBA students at the time. And so imagine how I felt going into my second year in 1972 and 1973, knowing that I would be having Jack Behrman for not one but two classes. I had the blessing of having Jack for both international business and also for business and society, because that was the year that Jerry Barrett became ill, and Behrman stepped in and took over Barrett's business and society class. One of the first things that I recognized with Jack Behrman was that he expected more from his students. He demanded more, and that was a good thing. I recognize that while many of my students were anxious about engaging in conversation with Jack, in fact, that's exactly what he respected, and that's what he was looking for. So early on, I began speaking up. I sometimes offered alternative points of view, alternative narratives, and I think that I'd like to think that Jack and I established a relationship of mutual respect in that context. Later, when I graduated in 1973, I had the pleasure of being hired as the full-time director of the MBA program, along with Cal Atwood, and the two of us reported obviously to the faculty chair of the MBA program, who was Jack Behrman. So one day I went from calling him Professor Behrman to the next day calling him Jack, and I could not appreciate more the kindness, the support, and the advice that he offered me in that role. I certainly enjoyed working with him. I found him to be an incredible leader, very thoughtful. There's so many stories that I could tell about him, and they would include things like, again, his high expectations for every student in every class and every encounter that he had with students. I try to live into that to some extent today. I've tried to live into that my entire career by an understanding I had from him that my role as a professor is to help everyone think more clearly, be more focused, do better, achieve better, and to follow their passions in life. I was blessed to get to know Jack Behrman first as a student and then as a colleague. I try to emulate so many things about him in my life even today, and I appreciate the time that he invested in me, as he did in so many people who encountered him and were blessed to do so throughout their lives.
Hello, I'm Lynn Gerber. I had the good fortune of being in Professor Behrman's Business and Society class back when I was a first-year MBA in 1978. But I had the better good fortune of working with Jack for more than 15 years of my professional career. I think what can sum up best my relationship with Jack is a poem that I wrote for him that's called Thinking Back About Jack. Jack Behrman and I go a long way back. Through much of my career, he kept me on track. Beginning when I was an MBA and I sat in his class where he'd bellow and bray, and although I often in my seat would shrink, he'd seek me out and force me to think. Which is what he did too, when under his care, I developed programs and projects that caused me to dare. Sitting at lunches across from those eyes that were at once piercing, thoughtful, and wise. There were times that I'd complain and say with a groan, "When will you let me go off on my own?" We'd check off his to-do list and add reams to mine. I, not knowing that doing so was helping me shine. He taught me to understand the meaning of team. We developed a great one, pursuing the core dream. Under Jack's tutelage, spiced with books from his shelf, I learned the importance of causes greater than self. Although there were times that I'd grumble and bristle, I sure miss his leadership, moxie, and whistle.
Hi, I'm Terry Surgisgetter-Heath.
Hi, I'm Bryce Heath.
We were in the first official MBA Enterprise Corps group in 1991, and we were stationed in Krakow, Poland. It was an incredible, life-changing experience, and Jack Behrman was instrumental in making this program happen. He was a quintessential leader and visionary. One memory that has always stood out was when he told us that he had trained his eyes to not need glasses any longer, and he did this through eye exercises. What a focused and disciplined person. Jack was a proponent of lifelong learning, a true motto of his.
We first met Jack at the MBA Enterprise Corps initial training that was held at UNC Chapel Hill. He was this thin, older gentleman who at that time was about 70 years old. He had a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and this program was his baby. He had a commanding presence and believed in what he did, and we heard some fascinating stories of his prior years in academia, government, and other areas. What a multi-dimensional life he had.
The last time that we saw Jack was at the MBA Enterprise Corps reunion in San Francisco, 10 years after the Corps had begun. We were grateful for the effort and planning that went into this reunion and being able to see Jack, Lynn Gerber, and many of our colleagues. We are happy to have gotten to know Jack, a truly extraordinary man. God bless.
God bless.
Hi, my name is Stephen Tulsky. I was a student in the MBA class of 1979. It's a privilege to be asked to provide a tribute for Dr. Behrman. He was one of my two favorite professors at business school, and he was the one who most appealed to the intellectual in me that really wanted to approach business more as a philosophical pursuit than as a functional technical pursuit. And he loved to get the class to engage in conversations that ultimately led to the big questions, like what's the nature of man and what's the meaning of life? And that was really much more interesting to me than finance or marketing or advertising or whatever. He left such a good impression on me that many years later, when I was considering going to get a PhD in business, I visited the campus and found him in, and we had a nice chat. I picked his brain. He gave me very useful input. And it was then that I discovered that he was a man of faith. And we had one of our typical philosophical conversations, and it ended up with his stipulation that there is one absolute immutable truth. And that, of course, was his faith. That was a very nice thing to learn about him. It was not something that I related to as well back then as I do now, but it was a nice sort of cap to my memory of Dr. Behrman. So thinking of him, I had not known that he'd passed, but we miss him, of course, and he was a very important part of my UNC experience.
Hi, I'm Clark Nielsen, class of 1981 MBA program at UNC. In fact, I got that blueprint in 1981 when I visited San Francisco on a job interview when I was probably attending Jack Behrman's business ethics class. I remember Jack only vaguely because I only had him for one class. His class was renowned among the MBA students. It was challenging. It challenged me in the area of ethics and how ethics can become complicated in a business situation when profit motive is at stake. And his moral and I would say Christian background gave me confidence that doing the right thing in all cases would be the better business decision. And so I thank Jack for steering me along that path, and I wish his family well. I'm thankful for the School of Business and what that has meant in my career and in my connections with folks in North Carolina mostly, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this tribute with those that knew him and maybe knew me, or can appreciate the people that are making the effort to make this happen, which I've never been involved with an effort like this. So first time I've ever filmed myself giving a tribute. So sorry if it's boring and rambling, but anyway, thank you, Jack.
My name is John Eric Larson. I was a graduate student at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill during the years from 1980 to 1982. I first met Jack Behrman during the last semester in business school when I took his business and society class. He was among a great set of faculty members at the University of North Carolina, including him, Dr. Levin, Dr. Dearborn, Esty, Harris, and Miles. I especially remember Drs. Behrman and Dearborn for being especially focused on the consequences of decision-making in business, on the community at large, and also a focus on producing long-term value from the actions taken by management. Years later, I was involved with, I worked on Wall Street and was involved with working with a company where we needed to make a decision as to whether or not they were going to be receiving fair value in a sale of that company. And the question was the securities to be received by the company we were represented fair value for the assets? We concluded that it was fair value based upon the fact that the stock price of the acquiring company was so valuable. I personally had misgivings about that decision because I felt that the stock of the purchasing company was way overvalued. It turns out that my misgivings were realized. I thought about this and felt terribly bad about it when I later learned that a neighbor of an uncle of mine in Minnesota had suffered grievously when the value of the stock that he received declined precipitously shortly after the merger was concluded. This led me a few years later to argue in front of the same committee that I had approved the acquisition that we did need to take into account what we thought the market effects of a transaction would be. And we decided that we would not proceed with the transaction proposed because we decided that the value of the acquiring company stock would decline precipitously after such a merger would be concluded. It was partially because of the kinds of questions that Dr. Behrman taught me to ask that I was able to find the courage to make the argument in the second case. I wish I had remembered that valuable lesson far earlier. Dr. Behrman was focused in the long term, and he deserves to be honored for his views.
I didn't really get to know Jack until my second year, but I found that the time that I spent with him was some of the most important times that I spent during the course of my MBA. He was always challenging, but thoughtful, and pushed me to be as thoughtful and as generous-spirited, and to think about things from the points of view of other cultures, and to realize that there were many different ways of making decisions and coming to a solution for the kinds of problems there might be. I felt very privileged to have taken a course with him and worked with Jack when I was at Carolina, and I'm pleased to be able to make this small contribution to his memorial. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
When Lynn first invited me to do a video testimonial for Dr. Behrman, I thought, oh, what a great idea. And I got that first email and I thought, oh, I need to think about this. And then I got a second email and I was like, you know, there are probably so many people that have so many more important things to say about him and their relationship with him than I do, because I only worked with him for a few short years. And this morning I got the last ominous email saying, this is it, this is your last chance. And I thought, no, I do have something to say. I only knew Dr. Behrman for a few short years. We worked together at the North Carolina Global Center. And I came to Chapel Hill not knowing anyone for the job. And it was so comforting to me to have him in the office to talk with informally, to work alongside, to have him mentor me and show me the ropes. And one day in particular really stood out and still stands out, and it's what made me decide to do this video. They were predicting an ice storm, and since I'm from New England, I kind of poo-pooed it and didn't really worry about going home early or anything. I thought, oh, I can handle that. I know how to drive in the bad weather. And Dr. Behrman came into my office and he said, we're going to have an ice storm and I think you should go home. And I kind of waved him off and said, oh, I'll be fine. And so he walked away. And about, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes later or so, he came back and he said, you know, Melissa, I really think you should go home. And I said, oh, I'm a New Englander. I know how to drive in the bad weather. And he said, yeah, he said, but no matter how good a driver you are, you really can't deal with ice on the roads. And there's really nothing more important than your safety. So why don't you just take your work and go home with it? And so I kind of sighed and poo-pooed it and said, okay, Dr. Behrman, I'll go home. So I went back to my emails and what I was doing, but I slowly started to wrap up and was packing up and getting ready to go home when he came by a third time with his tweed hat on and his overcoat. And he said, I'm going now, he said, and I'd really enjoy it if you would accompany me to the parking garage. And there was just no way to turn him down. And I think his demeanor and his way of interacting with people was one of his greatest gifts. And now that I'm more experienced and have my own staff who are very dedicated and working long hours and maybe not taking as good a care of themselves as they should, I'm careful to remember Dr. Behrman's lesson that the person is more important than the work. And I hope that the people around me see that his lesson was taken to heart, and it has really guided who I am and how I behave. Thank you, Dr. Behrman. Thank you.
I'm Lee Shamblin, and I'm recording this in an airport in Guangzhou, China. I'm on my way back to the U.S., having spent a week in Hangzhou with my innovation management students as they start an internship with a biomedical device company there. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't had Jack Behrman in my life. Jack encouraged me when I worked with him at the MBA Enterprise Corps and later to use my experience and my skills for a larger purpose. He told me to go and explore the world and try to find my place in it. He set a wonderful example of doing that. He also told me to take things in stride, that the world has a lot of different cultural practices, and sometimes you just got to go with the flow. Today I had a 14-hour layover in this airport. Jack would have just said, that's all right, read a book. And he's right. Jack, I miss you. I love you. You've had such a positive impact on my life, and I can never thank you enough.